I want to talk to you today about the quilt that I'm holding in front of you, which is a scrap 9-patch and snowball combination. I've currently got really into scrap quilts, and they're very satisfying because it seems as though you're making quilts from nothing. But obviously you have previously got the fabric in your fabric stash, and it takes a little bit of preparation. So although it's very straightforward and very simple 2-block quilt, I thought I'd also take the opportunity of explaining to you how I go about preparing for this scrap quilt. Now, those of you who are new to patchwork might say, oh, well, I haven't got any scraps, but I'm going to use 2.5-inch strips and squares of fabric. So you could actually do this with a jelly roll, which are very commonly available now. This is obviously done in bright fabrics. You could color coordinate it with any jelly roll you like. You could also cut a layer cake up. So you could use the pre-cuts, or even, as I say, since we're using 2.5-inch squares, you could take nickel packs because you just divide those into 4. So all of it takes a little bit of preparation and a little bit of cutting. So as I say, with scrap quilts, preparation is everything. The sewing is obviously very straightforward. So let me just move this aside, and you'll see underneath I've got bits of my preparation. So what I did was, I have a drawer in my room which is bright fabrics, from which I make lots of kiddies quilts. I'm left then with bits of the bright fabric. So one evening I sat and cut everything into 2.5-inch strips. So here we go, lots of 2.5-inch strips, and anything that wouldn't cut into a 2.5-inch strips, I've cut into a square. So in the old days, they used to call these laundry basket quilts. I've kind of nicknamed them shoebox quilts, but as you see, that's a bit of a misnomer. It's a bit of a poetic license because I use any old container that I can get hold of. And as I'm cutting them, sometimes I color coordinate them, but maybe that's just another step. So I would put this all in a pile and start from here. Then what I did for the quilt that we're talking about is I did cut it into a series of 2.5-inch squares. Some of them are beautifully cut into sections here. These were, I thought, going to be piano keys, but actually I've decided that the quilt doesn't need them, so I've got them ready for my next quilt. But if I showed you how I like to cut, I would layer these up like this, so that, because I know they're all the same width, and then I would take my trusty rotary cutter and ruler, move these aside, and I would cut these into 2.5-inch sections. So ruler on the top, ruler on the bottom. This is a rough edge, so I'm going to make this slightly bigger than I need, and I'm going to cut several at a time. You've got enough cutting to do. Please don't do them one at a time unless they're really awkward. So I would just put those aside, and that obviously is rubbish, but then I'm going to wander up here, and I'm also going to show you what also happens. No, that one's all right. I'll just go along, but at some point we'll get to, right, here we go. This is a bit that I wanted to show you. That bit obviously gets thrown away, and I don't think it's going to happen on here. That's also going to be waste, but I would work my way along. Maybe we'll, yeah. And then you're probably going to get to a bit that's not usable as a 2.5-inch strip. Well, how sad is this? I would put this into another little bag with these guys that I feel I can use into a Mile a Minute or Scrappy Log Cabin, which would be another workshop. So I'll come back to those, but they're not wasted. The fabrics are too nice, too bright, and I think they're big enough for me to use. So I will pop those aside for another day. I'll pop those in there. We've finished with all those. So that's how I would cut my squares. So don't try to get out of the habit of cutting them one at a time, because you've cut strips that are 2.5 inches wide. You can layer cut. That's what the rotary cutter was for, after all. So back to the quilt I wanted to talk about today. It's a 2-block quilt. We've got standard 9-patch and we've got snowball.